Hello everyone, Dr. Polaris here. This episode has been a long time coming, and is a continuation of my series examining the history of paleoart and depictions of dinosaurs in popular culture, the most recent of which was uploaded about 3 years ago now. Even though it feels like only yesterday, it's scary how time flies. Before we get to the main body of this episode, I'd recommend maybe going back and watching the first 3 episodes in order to get caught up if you want to. To give a brief summary, we ended off by looking at the 1925 film adaptation of The Lost World, which featured groundbreaking stop-motion effects by Willis O'Brien, with the dinosaurs featured being directly based on the now iconic paintings of Charles R. Knight. We'll come back to O'Brien later, but it would be best to begin to briefly examine the state of paleontology as it stood in the mid-1920s. Thanks to the promotional efforts of Knight, Henry Fairfield Osborn, and the expansion of Hollywood cinema, dinosaurs had now become fully established in popular culture. Animals such as Allosaurus, Brontosaurus, Stegosaurus, and of course Tyrannosaurus rex, were prehistoric celebrities of early 20th century dinomania. While the period is often remembered today for its now very outdated depictions of dinosaurs, with the great reptiles often viewed as lumbering, dim-witted monstrosities, there were still interesting exceptions to this. As we saw in the previous video, Thomas Huxley and Franz Nopska's theories concerning the dinosaurian origin of birds were still in circulation, while some species were thought of as being active and dynamic, such as the leaping theropod Laelaps and the admittedly inaccurate, agile, tree-dwelling Hypsilophodon. However, during this decade, the scientific mainstream would largely turn its back on the relationship between birds and dinosaurs. Thanks to Danish paleontologist Gerhard Heilmann's 1926 book, The Origin of Birds, which argued that dinosaurs lacked furculi, or wishbones, and therefore could not be related to modern birds. Heilmann came to the conclusion that proto-birds instead evolved from some other lineage of archosaurian reptiles, among the so-called thecodonts. We now have examples of well-preserved furculi from many species of non-avian dinosaurs, including early forms such as the coelophysoid Segisaurus. The English translation of this volume proved wildly successful, and went on to influence ideas regarding avian evolution for the next 4 decades. Thus, the dinosaur-bird connection had been decoupled, with the great beasts now seen as definitively reptilian evolutionary dead ends. When coupled with the effects of the upcoming Great Depression, and the influence of Osborn's eugenics-inspired views of the prehistoric world, this initiated a period referred to by Robert Bakker as the dinosaur doldrums, with scientific opinion stagnating and lacking the dynamism of earlier decades. Regardless, the dinosaur art of Charles R. Knight continued to inspire works of popular culture going into the 1930s, leading to the creation of Willis O'Brien's most famous stop-motion project, King Kong. The film, and its titular giant primate, was the brainchild of American filmmaker Merian C. Cooper, who had held a fascination with gorillas since he was a young boy. As an adult, Cooper joined RKO Pictures and began planning a so-called Terror Gorilla picture, which would end with a giant-sized ape climbing the tallest building in the world and fighting warplanes. Cooper was also influenced by Douglas Burden's accounts of Komodo dragons, and wanted to pit his giant gorilla against dinosaur-sized versions of these reptiles, stating to Burden, quote, "I also had firmly in mind to gigantize both the gorilla and your dragons to make them really huge. However, I always believed in personalizing and focusing attention on one main character, and from the very beginning I intended to make this the gigantic gorilla, no matter what else I surrounded him with," unquote. From the beginning, the ape protagonist, who would later be named Kong, was conceived as being a semi-humanoid monster, not exactly resembling a real gorilla, but a hybrid of ape and man who fought against modern civilization. However, after Willis O'Brien had produced an oil painting showcasing said monster, Cooper changed his mind and wanted Kong to more closely resemble a real gorilla. After rejecting 2 of O'Brien's proposed models for the big ape, Cooper got the dimensions of a silverback gorilla from the American Museum of Natural History, telling O'Brien that, quote, "Now that's what I want," unquote. When the final model was created, it had the basic look of a gorilla, but managed to retain some human-like qualities. For example, O'Brien's assistant Marcel Delgado streamlined the body by removing the distinctive big belly and rump of an actual gorilla. O'Brien would incorporate some characteristics of an earlier creature, known as Wild Willie, which he had created in 1915 for the silent short The Dinosaur and the Missing Link, which we covered in the previous video in this series. When it came time to film, Cooper agreed that Kong should walk upright at times in order to appear more intimidating. The plot of the film would be hashed out in the following years, with the story now being so famous that I probably don't need to remind you of it.
Hey, I heard we're going to Ape Island.
Yeah, to capture a giant ape. I wish we were going to Candy Apple Island.
Candy Apple Island? What do they got there?
Apes, but they're not so big.
Oh, okay then. Shady filmmaker Carl Denham, along with struggling actress Anne Darrow, charter a ship to the mysterious Skull Island in order to produce the movie of a lifetime. Once reaching the island, they, along with the ship's crew, journey inland and encounter politically incorrect natives who intend to sacrifice Anne to a being known as Kong. However, the big ape essentially falls for the young woman and protects her from the many prehistoric dangers present on the island. Later, Kong is captured by the crew and taken to New York to be put on show. He escapes and rampages through the city, before carrying Anne up the Empire State Building. Despite a heroic last stand, Kong is shot down by a formation of warplanes. When a policeman remarks that the planes got him, Carl Denham famously states, quote, "Oh no, it wasn't the aeroplanes. It was beauty that killed the beast," unquote. Over the course of the film, Kong battles a Tyrannosaurus that very closely resembles that featured in the works of Charles R. Knight. The crew encounter a Stegosaurus and a downright murderous aquatic Brontosaurus, while Anne is later menaced by a sea serpent-like Elasmosaurus and a Pteranodon, both of which are killed by Kong. All these extinct animals are almost exact replicas of Knight's paintings of them, and are presented as being violent, primitive monsters. Needless to say, King Kong was a huge success both critically and financially, with its use of special effects being groundbreaking for the time. The film continued where The Lost World left off, in presenting dinosaurs as dwelling in dense tropical forests in the modern world, playing on colonial-era stories of the Mokele Mbembe and other supposed living dinosaurs in the Congo, depicted as being antithetical to the urban metropolis of New York. Other 1930s creatives continued to be inspired by Knight's paintings as well, with perhaps the most prolific being the artist Zdenek Burian. Born in what is now the Czech Republic in 1905, Burian's artwork played a central role in the development of paleontological reconstruction, and he is regarded as one of the most influential paleoartists of all time. Burian began his career as an illustrator for adventure novels in the 1920s, although began to paint prehistoric subject matter in the following decade under the influence of Knight's work. Burian had no access to the actual fossil material of the different prehistoric animals. For the most part, his work was based on illustrations and published depictions of the bones. In the vast majority of cases, he only had a single photograph to serve as the basis for a painting. Despite this, Burian's work paid close attention to skeletal anatomy. He is, for instance, considered in many cases to surpass Charles R. Knight in the adherence to the underlying skeletal anatomy of his animals, despite Knight often working more closely with museums and having access to their collections. His paintings are often said to have a romantic feel about them, with there being generally less of an emphasis placed on violence and combat. Even though the vast majority of his depictions of dinosaurs are now considered outdated, with theropods that stand and walk in kangaroo-like tripodal stances, as well as sauropods that are forced to spend much of their time submerged. Burian's animals are often posed dynamically and appear to be quite active in many cases, which is more than can be said for the artwork produced by some of his contemporaries. A great deal of his paintings have gone on to achieve iconic status, having been copied and utilised for dinosaur books throughout his lifetime. His 1938 work, Tyrannosaurus with Trachodon, depicts the two species as active and alert despite their upright waddling gaits, with a small group of slender running ornithomimosaurs visible in the background. His most reproduced painting, entitled Brachiosaurus from 1940, is quite monumental and striking despite its inaccuracies, with the sauropods given a great sense of size and weight as they plough through the water. My personal favourite of Burian's works is his Iguanodon from 1950, which is thematically the darkest of his overall catalogue, and seems to reflect the brutal times in which the artist lived. A lone iguanodon trudges through a bleak, empty landscape, following a trail littered with the bones of its own kind, implying that this animal may be the last of its species. The dark pebbly skin and upright posture of the iguanodon are reminiscent of the kaiju Godzilla, who would make his debut 4 years later. The bleakness of this painting may stem from Burian's experiences of living through the Second World War, when his home country of Czechoslovakia was brutally occupied by Germany. Burian lived long enough to witness the dinosaur renaissance, and adapted his later work accordingly, with his sauropods painted after 1970 being firmly terrestrial and active. His works were collected in big volumes and were widely published internationally during the 1960s, solidifying his vision of dinosaurs in the minds of many, essentially playing the role of a more prolific European Charles R. Knight. In the world of the movie theatre, dinosaurs remained well represented after the great success of King Kong. Disney's highbrow experimental feature Fantasia, released in 1940, included a sequence centred on the Rite of Spring by Stravinsky, and featured many prehistoric animals, including a multitude of famous dinosaurs from different periods, depicted anachronistically as all living in the same ecosystem. The ecosystem in question was, of course, a hot, humid swamp forest, full of wallowing sauropods, a fat, waddling, pathetic Stegosaurus, and a monstrous, hyper-aggressive, red-eyed Tyrannosaurus with 3-fingered hands. The extinction of the dinosaurs is also shown, with the movie going for the rapid climate change model, which was a common theory at the time. The scenes of the dinosaur death march through the desert are actually quite sad, as most of these animals, aside from the T-Rex, had been presented to us as slow-witted, lovable and gentle creatures. In terms of design, the dinosaurs, as well as their ecosystem, are again directly based on Charles R. Knight's work. Another notable but infrequently mentioned animated project featuring dinosaurs, or in this case a dinosaur in the singular, is the Fleischer Studios Superman short The Arctic Giant. Released in 1942, this 9-minute cartoon details Superman's attempts to defeat a gigantic defrosted dinosaur as it rampages through Metropolis. Said to be a Tyrannosaurus, but only very vaguely resembling one, this lumbering green beast is the size of a skyscraper and stands with a very upright, tail-dragging posture. Causing great destruction, both the dinosaur in question and the short itself show many interesting similarities to Godzilla, although predating the Japanese kaiju film by 12 years. It is currently uncertain if the plot and design of Godzilla were influenced by the Arctic Giant, or whether their similarities are merely a coincidence. A work that absolutely had an impact on the creation of Godzilla was Rudolf Zerlinger's famous 1947 mural The Age of Reptiles, which is housed at the Yale Peabody Museum of Natural History in New Haven, Connecticut. Painted in the style of Renaissance frescoes and measuring 110 feet long, this work depicts nearly 350 million years of evolutionary history, capped with the Cretaceous age of dinosaurs at the far left end. Although typically bulky and plodding animals, Zerlinger's beasts are strikingly rendered and have influenced generations of people visiting the museum. Elements of this piece inspired both picture books and whole toy lines, while the greyish, imposing Tyrannosaurus, with its blunt snout, intense eyes and squat body, looks as if it could be Godzilla's ancient ancestor, and indeed it was a major influence on the look of the infamous kaiju. An important point to make about this post-1940 imagining of dinosaurs was that it had largely moved away from the Lost World genre that had defined dino pop culture of the preceding decades, as the old European-dominated world of the early 20th century began to be replaced by the more familiar modern paradigm of the United States as dominant global power. The colonial-era fantasies of prehistoric lost worlds shifted to a greater emphasis on extinct reptiles in science fiction, the anachronistic caveman feature, and also more symbolic uses of dinosaurs. The Arctic Giant already showed aspects of this, with the titular beast not even pretending to be an accurate depiction of a real species, instead functioning as a metaphor for fears of widespread annihilation after the attack on Pearl Harbor, which occurred only a few months before the short first aired. In the end, the rampaging dinosaur is defeated by Superman and pacified by being put in a zoo, showcasing a hopeful wartime message that America can triumph against foreign adversaries, no matter how powerful. The giant dinosaur as a metaphor representing forces bigger than ourselves also appears in the similar live-action 1953 film The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, produced after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The film depicts the aftermath of nuclear bomb tests in the Arctic, which awakens an enormous reptilian creature known as the Radosaurus, which proceeds to rampage down the eastern seaboard of the United States, famously destroying a lighthouse during the middle of the night. After causing havoc in New York, again just like King Kong, the monster is defeated through the use of radiation. This film pioneered both the giant monster and atomic monster genres that proved wildly popular in the 1950s. Predating Godzilla by a year, these movies expressed fears regarding nuclear annihilation during the Cold War, as well as other American societal phobias, such as communist infiltration and unease at new scientific developments. Dinosaurs were well suited to embody such fears of nature beyond human control, especially the power and scale of the atomic bomb. Given their ancient natural origins, perceived ferociousness, and often enormous size, all of these traits were combined into the iconic figure of Godzilla as well, albeit for slightly different reasons. With the nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the Lucky Dragon 5 incident still fresh in the Japanese consciousness, Godzilla was conceived as a metaphor for nuclear weapons. Although his name may come from a combination of gorilla, and Kujira, whale, the kaiju has almost always been portrayed as an enormous amphibious dinosaurian monster, awakened and empowered after many years by exposure to nuclear radiation. Art director Akira Watanabe combined attributes of Zerlinga's Tyrannosaurus, Burian's Iguanodon, a Stegosaurus and an alligator to form a chimeric monster, with Godzilla's rough, burnt-looking skin texture being inspired by the keloid scars seen on the survivors of Hiroshima. Originally standing about 50 metres or 164 feet tall, the creature is easily identifiable by his legendary roar and powerful atomic breath, which is utilised in levelling the city of Tokyo as the beast goes on the rampage, much like his American predecessor the Radosaurus was initially supposed to. Despite being portrayed as a frightening entity, the original 1954 iteration of Big G still elicited sympathy from audiences, given his vaguely humanoid appearance and slow lumbering movements. Just like the dinosaurs from Fantasia's Rite of Spring, given the campy direction of many of the later Godzilla movies, with the exception of Shin Godzilla and Godzilla -1, it's easy to forget that the 1954 original is a pretty dark and depressing feature, commenting on fears of nuclear annihilation and Japan's defeat by the USA at the end of World War II. While Godzilla strove for deeper commentary, dinosaur films released in the later 1950s often fell into the pure schlock category. Examples include 1955's King Dinosaur, a low-budget science fiction movie wherein a group of astronauts land on a planet inhabited by prehistoric animals, including the titular King Dinosaur, a Tyrannosaurus played by a green iguana of all things. The film ends with the dinosaurs being destroyed in another nuclear explosion. Needless to say, King Dinosaur is hilariously terrible, and was memorably ridiculed on Mystery Science Theater 3000. They also riffed on another schlocky dinosaur B-movie, The Beast of Hollow Mountain, which is only notable in that it was the first time in which cowboys and dinosaurs appeared on screen together, because you can't get more 50s Americana than cowboys and B-movie dinosaurs. Due to silly low-budget films like this, as well as the boatloads of cheap plastic toys depicting the extinct reptiles that were produced in the 50s, dinosaurs had become overly familiar, and were no longer seen with the senses of awe, wonder and fear that they had evoked in the early 20th century. They had become symbols of extinction and failure, with their size, power and ancient origins functioning as useful stand-ins for nuclear destruction and the wrath of nature in the atomic age, as well as gaining associations of childishness and camp. Where once dinosaurs were placed in critically acclaimed novels and films, often in tropical colonial settings, as the old European empires began to falter, the great beasts were not used in more symbolic ways, as in the Arctic Giant and Godzilla, found themselves relegated to fighting cowboys and lurking on other planets, always being defeated in the end. In a time of tense international relations and optimistic ideas of societal progress, it was perhaps reassuring to the American public that the poorly adapted, lumbering, stupid dinosaurs succumbed to extinction, as it was hoped that the similarly massive and scary Soviet Union would also die out, while the supposedly more sophisticated, capitalistic 1950s America would surely endure. There is more that could be said about dinosaurs being used as tools in advertising and consumerism at this time, but this video is already long enough. Perhaps I'll discuss that subject when I get to the next video in this series. Thanks for watching, everyone. The next episode will be covering the Spinosaurids, that most controversial group of theropods, thanks to the debate surrounding Spinosaurus itself. See you again soon. Cheerio.